The Shining is one of, if not the greatest horror film of all time. It was so ahead of its time that when it was released, it was panned by critics because there wasn't any mainstream horror films like it. Its atmosphere was something you never experienced before, and it had a central mystery that was open-ended enough to have speculation and debate about the Overlook to this very day. But what if I told you the version of the film you've been watching this entire time is the inferior version? There exists a cut of The Shining that trims out over 20 minutes of the film. It removes a lot of the setup, bringing us to the horrors of the hotel much quicker. Its improved pacing floods the film with a much stronger atmosphere. It trims much of the excessive trip to the hotel by Dick Halloran, making for a much more shocking end to his character. And it's my preferred way of watching the film, despite it being much more difficult to find. However, experiencing the American cut for the first time clued me into some subtext about the film that is a lot more muted in the international cut. I first noticed the difference when looking at the 4K Blu-ray of The Shining. While researching information about the disc, the runtime of 144 minutes caught my eye. It had been about 5 years since I'd watched The Shining, and I thought to myself, I don't remember the film being that long. My suspicions were correct, as the regular Blu-ray available in most of Europe is that shorter running time. There is a total of 21 changes between the two versions, varying between entire scenes being cut out to just a few seconds at the start of a scene being trimmed. The US domestic release of The Shining runs at 141 minutes and 11 seconds, not including credits, while the international version runs at 117 minutes and 4 seconds, with a total of 24 minutes and 7 seconds in the difference between them. To clarify, the international cut only removes footage. It doesn't add any new content. But why were those changes made? Very famously, The Shining was not well received upon its initial release. At the first ever Razzies in 1980, it was nominated for 2 awards, with Stanley Kubrick for Worst Director and Shelley Duvall for Worst Actress. In 2022, Shelley Duvall's award was rescinded, but that's a whole other story. Reviews from the time were brutal. The LA Times wrote, "Both those expecting significance from Kubrick and those merely looking to be scared may be equally disappointed." The Washington Post said that, "I can't recall a more elaborately ineffective scare movie." And this last one, which was too funny not to share, Variety wrote, "The crazier Nicholson gets, the more idiotic he looks. Shelley Duvall transforms the warm, sympathetic wife of the book into a simpering, hysteric." My god. When the film moved internationally from its American release, Warner Bros. Asked Kubrick to make changes to the film. According to an interview with Jan Harlan, who is a longtime collaborator with Kubrick as a producer, Warner Bros. Thought that it was very ambiguous and maybe a bit long. Kubrick responded saying, "Okay, that's fine, we'll make it a bit shorter." Jan says that Kubrick was not that stubborn. That makes perfect sense to me, as this wasn't even the first time changes were made to The Shining. There's a very famous piece of lost media relating to the film. After its 3rd day in theaters, Kubrick removed 2 minutes from the end, cutting state troopers finding Jack Nicholson's frozen body, and a scene where the hotel manager checks up on Wendy and Danny in the hospital. So it's no surprise that Kubrick would cut more from the film when asked. But was the reception any better across Europe now that those changes were made to the film? Surprisingly, yes, actually. While the film was almost universally panned in the US, the French and UK reviewers were much more willing to engage with the film critically. A collection of reviews from French critics at the time were all very positive, with the lowest out of the 5 critics rating it a 3 out of 5. A quote from the original British Film Institute review said, "The Shining, finally, is an iceberg that may in time prove to be one of the great Kubricks." If that's not a glowing review, I don't know what is. Of course, this wasn't universal. The Guardian said, Nicholson's performance, even if deliberately over the top, still shouldn't encourage as much laughter as fear, nor should the final twist of the plot look so illogical. But even with a much smaller sample size of original European 1980 reviews available, it's clear that, likely through a combination of different cultural expectations and improved pacing, that it was much better received across the pond. So what actually are those changes? Well, they can be categorized into 4 distinct sections: the setup, the midsection, Halloran's arrival, and the ending chase. Arguably, the biggest changes to the film are during the setup. 6 of the 21 changes are in the first 30 minutes, with a total of 10 minutes and 35 seconds of screen time being removed. The first 5 minutes of the film remain unchanged. The iconic drone shots still leave a foreboding atmosphere, and the initial introduction to our main characters of Jack, Wendy, Danny, and everyone's favourite Tony is kept the same. However, Wendy and Danny's first scene is cut short, ending on a much more foreboding note. In the international cut, the final line is Tony saying he doesn't want to go to the hotel, whereas in the American cut, Wendy reassures Danny.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torrance.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
Do you see how that feels unsettling? Now take a look at the American version.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torrance.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
Well, let's just wait and see. We're all gonna have a real good time.
Leaving out that reassurance communicates the vibe immediately that something is wrong with the Overlook. The second part of Jack's interview in the hotel has an extra minute and a half in the American cut. We get a little backstory about Jack formerly being a teacher, but his real passion is writing. And then Stuart Ullman explains why the Overlook closes during the winter. The part about Jack's backstory is unnecessary because it's already covered later in the scene by Jack saying he's outlining a new writing project. While finding out the Overlook closes during the winter because of the costs of keeping the road snow-free is nice as a fan of The Shining, it's not a necessary piece of information for the film to work. There's a clear switch with how Stuart Ullman's actor plays the scene after imparting that information. He asks Jack if people in Denver gave him any information about the job, and you can tell he's clearly holding something back. That something is the previous caretaker murdering his family. It helps to build this unsettling atmosphere around the Overlook, especially going straight from Danny saying that he doesn't want to go there, whereas with the additional footage in the American cut, everything feels a lot more normalized.
Well, this ought to be quite a change for you.
Well, I'm looking for a change.
The film continues in sync, with Danny and Tony talking in the mirror and the Jack-Wendy phone call. That leads into Danny's psychic vision of the twins, Danny screaming, and the elevator of blood. The films then diverge, with the American cut having a scene of Danny speaking to a doctor. This is the single biggest cut scene from the film. It runs at a total of 5 minutes and 28 seconds, and majorly slows the pacing of the film. The scene takes place in two parts. First, Danny's interview with the doctor, then Wendy speaking to the doctor separately. We learn that Danny blacked out and injured himself because of his vision, and we get more about Danny and Tony's relationship.
I guess Danny started talking to Tony about the time we put him in nursery school.
I think having an outside party be witness to Tony, with Wendy later explaining it, ruins some of the creep factor regarding Tony. It's an aspect of Danny that goes unquestioned in the international cut, which gives their family dynamic an unsettling edge. It leaves you as the viewer a lot of room to speculate about Tony, and leaving it unaddressed makes it creepier. Wendy reveals to the doctor about Jack's abuse of Danny, and I think it's a much stronger reveal later into the film. You can tell there is something off about Jack just by how Nicholson plays the character, but not being able to put your finger on what, for me, is the unsettling part. Whereas in the international cut, these scenes are completely absent. The next scene in both versions is the Torrance's journey to the Overlook, followed by the family's first tour. A lot is cut from that tour. The lounge, the Torrance's bedroom, and the exterior are all shortened without losing any necessary information. But the biggest change to the sequence is completely removing their tour of the Gold Room. I love this change. Not only does it make the film flow much better, as the scene lasts just under 1:40, but it makes the Gold Room reveal much later in the film so much more impactful. In the international cut, I love the contrast between the only two appearances of the Gold Room, with its first being completely empty and its second being lively and populated. The only part we lose from its American counterpart is Stuart Ullman explaining why they removed the alcohol over the winter for insurance reasons. But it's already inferred that the alcohol that Jack gets later in the film comes from the Faustian bargain he makes with the hotel.
My goddamn soul. Just a glass of beer.
Removing that ballroom scene also takes out 10 seconds from the start of Wendy, Danny, and Halloran's tour of the kitchen, which leads us up to the last of those 7 changes in the setup. This comes in the middle of Halloran's conversation with Danny. In the American cut, there is an additional 35 seconds, where Halloran explains that the Overlook has something similar to Shining.
You know, some places are like people. Some shine and some don't.
However, in the international cut, we go from Halloran asking Danny if he's seen anything about the hotel to Danny asking if there's something wrong with the place.
Now think real hard, Doc. Think.
Is there something bad here?
A small change I approve of. It reinforces the stronger atmosphere and the mystery surrounding the Overlook, as well as improving the pacing. The same can be said for all the changes in this first section. After that scene, we're brought to the middle section of the film, which starts with Danny exploring the hotel about 33 minutes in and ends with the first gold room scene an hour and 9 minutes in. The midsection has 7 total changes in the international cut. Those changes add up to 5 minutes and 3 seconds being removed, which is under half of the runtime that was cut from the opening section. Those changes are mostly pretty minor as well. Chop this shot of Wendy walking through the hotel, cut this extra shot of Jack throwing the ball, and trim a bit off the top and tail of both of these shots. Nothing crazy. The 2 bigger changes come from near the start and end of this section, with an extended conversation between Jack and Wendy. After that, they remove just over a minute from Jack and Lloyd's conversation. Of the 2, the less interesting cut comes from the gold room. Jack says he's been sober for 5 months, and he complains about his wife giving him grief.
Just a little problem with the old sperm bank upstairs.
Nothing instrumental was lost cutting this. The more interesting cut, however, comes from Jack and Wendy's conversation. To place you, they've been moved in for a month, and it comes directly after the first time we see Danny tricycling through the Overlook. Wendy brings Jack breakfast, and Wendy encourages him about his writing. The scene ends with Jack being condescending towards her.
It's just a matter of settling back into the habit of writing every day.
Yeah, that's all it is.
But the conversation continues in the American cut. Jack talks about how much he loves the place, and how he feels like he's been here before. It's the strongest piece of déjà vu he's ever had.
It was as though I'd been here before.
This adds to the element that Jack's always been a part of the Overlook, like Grady telling him he's always been the caretaker, or Jack being in the photo from 1921. It's a cool scene, and I'd find it difficult to cut if I was the director. To tell the truth, there are 2 more scenes that were cut from this section. These scenes aren't interesting by themselves, but their presence implies a wider commentary throughout The Shining that's missing from, or at least vastly downplayed in the international version. The first is in between the hedge maze and Danny first trying to investigate room 237. It's a small scene of Wendy making food, while the impending snowstorm is talked about on the TV. Second is the scene of Danny and Wendy watching TV. Danny asks if he can go get his fire truck from his room, and promises not to wake Jack by being extra quiet. This scene is in between Danny seeing the twins in the hallway, and of course the scene with him and Jack. I support these changes. You don't miss out on any important information you need for the story. You also keep the unsettling atmosphere strong, and you're going from creepy moment to creepy moment, as well as maintaining that stronger pacing. But in the international cut, the presence of televisions are majorly downplayed. The most it's in focus is Dick Halloran shining in the latter half of the film, which of course he's not watching while he's shining. The film dedicates a lot of screen time to televisions, which implies significant meaning behind them. A line from the film that always stuck out to me was during the car ride up to the hotel. Danny says he knows about cannibalism from the TV, and Jack sarcastically responds, "It's okay, he saw it on the television."
It's okay. You saw it on the television.
With a stronger presence of characters watching television throughout the American cut, it makes me think that Kubrick was commenting on our relationship with TV. Whenever it's on screen, our characters are absorbed by it. It may be making a point about the influence of television on not just kids' brains, but even adults. However, Jack never watches TV and makes light of Wendy being a certified horror film addict. Even though there is much more boundary pushing and risky material present in books, which is represented by Jack, the influence of the visual medium will take blame, as adapting a novel to screen is what grifters will link the next Moral Panic to, despite it already being out there in the world. To put it simply, it's going to take blame because it's a film and not a book. You also have to consider the time period The Shining was released. It released in 1980, and the 70s and 80s were no strangers to moral panics from media because of quote-unquote objectionable material. To give you context, the line, "Your mother sucks cocks in hell" from The Exorcist in 1973 was considered incredibly shocking to audiences at the time. That was the culture The Shining was entering into, so perhaps Kubrick, who was making a horror film, preempted the moral panic that would be attached to this film. The only reason The Shining probably wasn't blamed for any real-life murders is because of how badly it was initially received. Let's keep in mind that this was the era of saying Dungeons & Dragons was a satanic activity. There's a very in-depth article that breaks down all the television and media references in The Shining if you're looking for something meatier on the topic. But that was just my casual reading of its presence. The next section is the Halloran entrance, which may be a misleading title, because only 3 of the 6 scenes cut from this section involve Halloran getting to the Overlook. All 6 of the changes total to 7 minutes and 58 seconds. But first, let's orient where we are in the film. We've just had the absolute nightmare fuel Room 237 old woman scene, and Dick Halloran has just tried to call the Overlook with no response. Jack comes to report his findings about what's in Room 237, and this contains the first cut of this section. There's a line cut of Jack comparing how Danny's injury from Room 237 must have been self-inflicted, as it's the exact same scenario as when the doctor visited him much earlier in the film.
It wouldn't be that different from the episode that he had before we came up here, would it?
Of course, that scene is missing from the international version, so keeping this line would have been very confusing for the audience. A tiny cut of 2 rings of the phone from the start of Halloran's conversation with the county rangers is made. Then after the massive gold room scene, we have an interaction between Danny and Wendy, only present in the American version. The scene runs for 2 minutes and 25 seconds. It starts by Wendy planning on how to get away from the hotel, before Tony, who's controlling Danny, interrupts her by screaming "Red Rum."
Red rum!
Danny, what's the matter, hon?
Red rum!
Tony talks to Wendy about how Danny can't wake up, and he's gone away. It's a kinda cool scene, but the scene where Danny is shouting "Red Rum" later in the film is so much more impactful when we've never heard it said before. It may also spoil the reveal later that Red Rum is just murder backwards, because you as a viewer may have already put that together. The next 3 scenes are the most superfluous in the American cut, and are often cited as why the international cut is superior. Firstly, Halloran has a second conversation with the fire department. Then, the scene that's in both versions of Halloran waiting on the plane is extended slightly to include Halloran asking the flight attendant what time they'll arrive in Denver.
What time will we get to Denver?
We're due to arrive at 8:20, sir.
Thank you very much.
The cuts stay diverged as Halloran calls a guy called Larry, and we find out about how he gets the snowplow.
That means I'm going to need a snowcat to get up there, Larry. Can you fix me up with one?
We follow Halloran in his snowplow, which is in both versions. And finally, there's a scene, only in the American cut, between Wendy and Danny, where they watch TV. Wendy says she's going to go see Jack, and will lock the door.
I'll be back in just about 5 minutes. I'm gonna lock the door behind me.
The cuts sync up again with probably the most famous scene from The Shining. There are only 2 more minor differences from that point onwards, which we'll circle back to. It's no surprise that these 3 scenes were cut, as they're complete tension killers. Just as things are ramping up, the pacing is brought to a screeching halt with these additions. In the international version, there's only 2 minutes between Grady telling Jack to correct his family and the all work, no play reveal. In the American version, it's 9 minutes and 37 seconds. Take everything I've said for most of the other cuts, with the pacing, atmosphere, and creepiness being much improved in the international version, and triple it for these changes. We're supposed to be in the depths of the horror at this point, and there's no reason to stop the train for information we don't need. Even excluding the slightly creepy scene of Danny first screaming "Red Rum," which is a large portion of the runtime of this section, you can uncontroversially cut the 5 other changes, totaling to 6 minutes and 7 seconds of runtime. There's only 2 changes left. One is Wendy's escape through the house, and the second is Danny's escape from the maze. Here are words you may have never thought would exit my mouth. I prefer the American version's ending sequence. The first difference is Wendy seeing the reception filled with skeletons, which is a change I could take or leave. It's not a peak scare, but it's certainly not unwelcome. While being chased in the maze, Danny fakes his footsteps to throw Jack off his trail, then hides in a bush until he has the opportunity to escape. We see Jack hunting him, and in the international version, we go straight from this shot to Danny meeting Wendy. However, in the American cut, we get this additional shot of Jack being unsure in which direction to chase. When I watched these back to back, I thought that Danny got away a little too quickly from Jack. With this extension, and the previous spooky scary skeleton situation extending the chase, it made his escape, for how windy the maze is, much more realistic for me. The international version isn't a major downgrade by any means. Those last two changes only add up to 33 seconds. But the American version holds the tension, which I find much more suitable for this scene. The question I'm sure you've been asking this entire time is, which cut of The Shining did Kubrick prefer? Unfortunately, there isn't a clear answer to this. The IMDb trivia for the film says that, contrary to popular belief, Kubrick regarded both versions of the film as the director's cut, but there's almost no way to confirm that he actually said that. If I had to guess which version Kubrick preferred, I would say the international cut. Kubrick did live in London from 1961 until he died, and the film was received much more positively in Europe. Not that he had a particularly good relationship with critics, but as a creative myself, getting positive reception for your work is a great feedback loop to know what's working. I would find it difficult to ignore that as a factor. If you couldn't already tell, I much prefer the international cut to the American cut. The setup and the Halloran entrance sections are so massively improved that it's weird even seeing the film with these extra scenes. To me, it felt like watching through deleted scenes on bonus features. I completely understand why they were shot. It's always better to have as much exposition shot as possible. It's much easier to cut exposition in editing than having to get reshoots. While I did enjoy certain aspects of the American cut, and it was cool witnessing some of the scenes for the first time, I can't say that I'll be revisiting the American cut anytime in the future. The real shame about these two versions is how the international cut is far less available than the American version, even here in Ireland. The American cut is the version available on most streaming services, and the 4K release of the film is the American cut as well. If you want to watch the international, you'll have to pick up a European Blu-ray, or on a streaming service I found that you can get the option for both. However, if you're from America, you may have to use some more dubious methods to find it. For your next rewatch of The Shining, I implore you to try the international cut. It's so much faster paced, the atmosphere is much stronger, and while it's interesting to see all the stuff I never saw from this version of The Shining, it's not worth the trade-off.